we go. We're good.
Good to go?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, cool. I'll just let everybody get onto the YouTube and then we'll get going. Okay. Okay, cool. So, welcome back again, everybody, to another session on Game Fruit. So if you saw, like, in the message that I put out at the start of the week, I put up a message which basically was saying some of the stuff that we were going to be covering today. So we're going to be covering a little bit of stuff to do with enemy AI, so that we're going to have someone to sort of battle out in the game. We're also going to be adding in some projectiles, so that we have a way of defending ourselves in the game. And I'm going to go through one or two things that people asked about last week, as well as some stuff that we found that we needed to sort of add in order to make the game run a little bit smoother. So, whilst what we'll do to begin with is, if you could all make your way over to Game Fruit, I'll pop a link up in the Discord chat, just in case you haven't already got it open in front of you.
Okay.
And then if you could either all open up the games that you were working on last week, or the version of the game that I've put in the chat, that would be great as well. So that way we can start adding on to it and things like that. There was a point that someone brought up last week. I think they asked it sort of just after the live stream ended, which was to do with story points in the game. One of the easiest things that you can do with story points is actually use some of the ones that Game Fruit have already got scripted. And you can find these if you have a look on my screen now on the YouTube stream, or on Discord or whatever platform you're on, you should be able to see in the Game Fruit Classic Pack, which you should be able to get as part of the game, you can actually add in a few story points. So if you scroll down through the menu, you should find that there's a story point section. So if you wanted to add some of those in, you just have to simply click and drag one of them into your game. And if you right click on it and then click on Edit Object Behavior, you can actually amend what's put in the story point in that message box. So that's one thing that you can do if you decide that you'd like to add a story point into the game. The programming for it is definitely something that you could look at if you want to, and there are a few tutorials out there that can guide you through it. But if you wanted to just pop one in sort of quickly instead of having to program your own version, that's definitely something that you could look at doing. So, what we're going to start off with today is we're going to be doing a little bit of stuff to kind of make our playable character run smoother. But before that, I'd like to just demonstrate what we're going to try and achieve sort of by the end of today. So I've got a bit of a demo of something that I've been working on over the last couple of days. So if you have a look on YouTube, you can see that what I've now got is a weapon which I can fire at enemies. We've also added in the ability to open doors, because I think someone asked last week about how using doors worked, so we're going to cover that today. And you'll be able to see as well that I've also added in this enemy AI. So now during the game, we have someone so that we can battle it out with. And during the course of the week, or during the stream, if you've got time, you're welcome to kind of build your level up so that you've got a much kind of broader game that kind of covers a lot more areas. So this is the type of thing that we're going to be covering today, and we're also going to be covering a whole bunch of new concepts as well that we've not looked at yet. We're going to start looking at some functions, which is another kind of core programming concept that that'll be good for you to come familiar with. So we're going to cover a whole bunch of really new, cool and exciting stuff. So, the first thing we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to prevent our playable character from gliding. So remember, in the live stream today, I am also joined by Andrew and Joe. So if you do have any questions, remember to pop them up in the live stream, in the Discord chat, or ask us over on the voice channel, whatever kind of works for you. So like I said, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cover this concept of making our playable character move slightly smoother. So some of you might have noticed that when you're playing as the playable character, you might find that as you're mid-jump, if you press one of the direction keys, either the left or right key, as you're mid-jump, your character sort of glides when they land. And of course, this doesn't look very realistic, because in real life, of course, the character would actually be running like it is on my screen now. So we're going to add a couple of blocks of code to begin with, which is going to stop that gliding from happening. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go and edit our character script, and we'll wait for that to load up. And the area of code that we're going to be amending is this when up arrow released section, which is down here. And what we're going to be doing is telling the code that when we are mid-jump, what we want it to do is stop. We want to just stop it from causing that glide when they land back on the when they land back on the ground. So, Caleb, if you want to go to, if you scroll up a little bit in the Discord chat, you should see a version of the game which I've uploaded earlier called teaching_game_2.json. If you use that, you can import that into GameFruit, and you can use that version of the game, which is the one that I'm going to be editing today. So you can use that one, and you can just sort of add to it as you can just kind of edit it as you please. It's entirely up to you. Okay. Okay. So preview failed. That just might be. It does happen sometimes. If you does that happen several times when you try and run the game, that it just comes up with preview failed? Sometimes I know that can sometimes happen. If it does happen, just try and refresh the browser and reload in the game and try it again. I have had that error come up before, so just kind of refresh the browser and then have a look to see if it comes back. So has it come back? If it has come back, then I'll let everybody sort of catch up, just in case we're having some problems. I know it can be a bit temperamental. I think I had that message earlier, actually, Oliver. I had that exact message earlier, and I think I just had to refresh the browser and then it came back. Okay, so we'll carry on for now, just as everybody's sort of catching up and getting the games loaded in and things. So, like I was saying, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be editing this when up arrow is released section. And the reason that we're going to do that is to just stop the character from gliding. So what we're going to do is we're going to be adding in two of these if statements. And if you remember from last time, the idea of an if statement is that we're going to be checking a condition, and if that condition is true, then we're going to perform a certain action. So in the case in this case, what we're doing at the moment is if the character's velocity, y velocity, is equal to 0, what that means is that they're not currently jumping, and therefore what we want to do is play the idle animation. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a section to this block which checks to see if you are pressing the left or right arrow whilst you're mid-jump. So that way, So that way, when you're mid-jump, you're not going to start gliding when you land again. Okay. Yeah, have project load error. Okay. Couldn't load the game. Okay. You could you could try either a different browser or restart your browser. Try that and then reload the game that way. That might work. Like I said, I know it can be a bit temperamental sometimes. Try restarting your browser and then loading the game in again. If Oliver, you sort of have more problems as you're working your way through the game, and it keeps sort of happening, the same problem happens. One of us should be able to help you out in one of the help chats if you need to catch up. Just if you know if you do fall behind a little bit because you're having problems, if you get it to work and you need a hand catching up, just let us know and one of us can help you out in one of the help rooms in the voice channels. We should be able to help you out there. Okay, so we're going to start adding in this code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add in 2 new if statements. So you can find those under the control flow menu. And if you drag those in, we're going to pop them. Make sure that we're popping the new if statements underneath the existing one. We don't want it to be part of the same if statement because that's not going to work. We want to be popping it just underneath the existing if statement. And I'm going to duplicate it so that we have 2 of them because we need to be checking if the left arrow key is pressed or the right arrow key is being pressed whilst you're mid-jump. So to do that, you can go to control flow and you should find a block in, actually, I think it's in, I've lost the block myself now, let me just find it. In events, sorry, forgotten where the block was myself then. So if you go to events, you should find a block there called key \delete pressed. What we're going to want to do is we're going to add that in. And we're going to want one for both if statements. So we're going to want one for the top if statement and the bottom if statement there as well. And what we want to do is we want to say if the left arrow key is pressed or the right arrow key is pressed, then we play that run animation. So that way when the character lands, it's not going to look like they're gliding. So what you need to do is you need to go to the animation menu on the left and select the play animation block. And if you pop that into both of those sections, you should find now that if you write in play animation run, if you pop that in there, what you should see now that when you play the game, you're not going to have that character gliding along the floor when they land. So if you hit the play button now, you should find, once my game loads, that now, whilst I'm mid-jump, if I press an arrow key, my character is still running as normal when they land. So it's just a little bit of code that just kind of makes the game a little bit smoother, because I know it does look slightly strange when your character lands and all of a sudden they're just gliding along the floor. So by having just these 2 bits of code, these 2 new blocks, it's just going to help you to kind of have a smoother running game that's going to just, run in a more kind of realistic way. So I'll leave that on the screen for a little while just so that everybody can catch up, and then we'll carry on in a second. I'm glad you've got that working now, Oliver. I know like I said, I know it's a little bit temperamental sometimes, so if you do need a hand with anything, remember, just pop it in the chat and we'll be able to kind of help you out. Okay, has everybody got up to that stage? Does anybody want me to hold off a second, or are we okay to carry on? Super. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to add in a small bit of code to the playable character script again, which is just going to make the playable character, we're just going to essentially be adding a tag to the playable character that says that this specific character in the game is our playable character, because what we don't want is for our playable character, as we're playing the game, we need to make sure that every object that we have in the game reacts in some way to our playable character. So we need to add a tag that will enable us to do that. I'm just going to hold off a second just so that everybody can catch up, and then we'll move on to that bit. I've left the code up on the screen for everyone anyway, just in case they need to catch up. I'll zoom in a bit. Okay. Is everybody caught up? So we're still on the same point with adding to stop the gliding at the moment. So on that block of code, when up arrow is released, we're still on that section. We're going to move on in a sec. Okay. So we'll carry on, and then if anybody wants me to go back to anything, just let me know, and I can go over a few things again. So all we're going to do now is we're just going to add in that tag that associates our playable character as the main playable character in the game. So if you all go up in your playable character script to the when the level starts block, which should be somewhere near the top of your script, we're just going to add in a block from sensing, which is add tag name on myself. You should find it under the tagging section. If you drag that up into when the level starts, you need to give your playable character like a tag name. So I'm going to call it player, but it's up to you what you call it. But you'll need to remember what you've called it, because we're going to be using this tag name later on in the game. So make sure that you remember what you've given the playable character's tag name. Remember what you've named it, because we're going to be using that later on. So make sure that you've got that that name in place. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a second, just so that everyone can catch up. Remember to let me know if I'm going too fast, so that I don't want to kind of rush ahead and then have people left behind. So just let me know if you need me to slow down, or if you want me to go over something again. Okay. Is everyone okay to carry on? Super. Okay, so we'll carry on then, and then if anybody wants me to go back to anything, just let me know in Discord, and we'll go back to it, and we'll go over it again. We've got plenty of time, so don't feel like if there's anything you do want me to cover, or if there's anything you didn't quite understand, just please let me know so that we can go over it again. We've got plenty of time. So I remember someone asked me last week how we could set doors in our game so that we can use keys to unlock doors. So we're going to go over that now, and we're going to actually be covering a fairly new concept with this as well, which we'll go over in just a second. So I'm going to close my character script, and I'm going to save it because we need to make sure that it's all saved. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a section to my game that's going to sort of house my door. Now, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you've got enough space for your door to kind of fit, because otherwise it's not going to, the animation and things like that's not going to work properly. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make some space in my game that I could, so that I've got a section that I can place my door into. So I've decided that I'm going to place my door sort of up here. So I'm going to add in a few tiles, just so that I've got enough room to sort of build up the platform of the game. So I'm going to put my door sort of up here. I'm going to move these spikes out the way because I don't want those there. And I'm going to place my door in this section just here. And you can find the doors in the media menu on the left of the screen here. There's actually a section called doors. So I'm going to choose this one that's sort of at a slight angle, and I'm going to put that door just there. Okay, so if everyone would like to do that first, so just build a little section of the game, move some objects and a few obstacles around just so that you've got enough room to put the door into. And then we'll get to work in a second on adding a script to that door and also to a object that's going to act as a key. Now you can select one of those collectibles. You can probably see the collectibles menu on the left as well. There is actually a key already there, so I'm going to use that as my as the key to unlock the door, and we're going to be putting a script on this object as well. So when you're adding in the door, make sure that you're on the objects layer, because you don't want it, if you don't want to be on the floor layer or the background layer especially, because those have been reserved for other things, and the floor layer of course uses a tile map, so it's not going to, the door won't function properly if you place it into the level on the floor layer. So you need to make sure that it's on the objects layer, and just make sure that you've got enough space around it so that you're able to actually have it swing open to have your character walk through it. So I'll give everyone a little while to do that, and then we'll carry on in a second. And I'll add a little bit more to my level as well as while everyone is doing that. yeah, so I'll just give everyone a couple more minutes to add a little bit to their level, and then we'll move on. So like I said, we're going to be covering a new concept in a second, which is called global variables. So last week, we started getting used to the idea of using variables, and the idea with using variables is that we're storing a piece of information in the computer's memory. So what we're going to be doing this week is we're going to be using something known as a global variable. So the difference between sort of an ordinary variable or like a local variable and a global variable is that this global variable that we're going to create today will actually be accessible throughout any script that we create in the game. So you might have noticed last week that when we were using variables, the variables that we had, they were specific to one script. So by creating a global variable, what that means is that we're able to access that same that same variable throughout any script that we create in the game. So we're going to be making use today of a global variable. And if you'd like to sort of have a look at my screen now, I've actually got a diagram here which demonstrates how a global variable works. So you can see here that the grey circle represents the main program, and you can see that that global variable is accessible at any part of that in that grey area. Okay, and you can see that a local variable is only available in one small section. So when we created our variables before, the variable was specific to that one script. It was more of a local variable. Whereas now we're going to be creating a global variable which is available throughout the entire game. So any script that we build, we can access this global variable. Okay, and like I said last week, we use variables all the time in games. In programming, because they're really, really useful to hold bits of information that we need to use throughout our program. So we're going to be using more variables and a lot more variables as we work our way through the game today. So is everyone happy for me to carry on to cover how we program doors, or does anyone want a bit more time to cover, to edit their games a little bit, or are we okay to carry on? That's fine, no worries. Yeah, take your time. Like I said, we've got plenty of time, so just let me know. Give everyone a little bit longer to add a few things in, and then we'll carry on in a second. Okay, is everyone happy to carry on? Super. Okay, so like I said, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to be adding a script to this key object that we've just put into the game. Okay, so whatever object that you're going to have as your key, we're going to add a script to that to begin with. So right click and click on add script, and you're going to get another blank script. First thing we're going to do is we want to say there's only a really small section of code that we need to use with this for the key object. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to events, and we're going to say when created. So we're going to get that when created block. And what we want to do, like we've done with pretty much every other object in the game so far, we want to add a tag which says that this object is a key. So we're going to go to add tag name on myself, and we're going to use that block in the game, in the script, sorry, and we're going to call it, I'm going to call mine key, but it's entirely up to you what you call it, just as long as you remember what it is so that you can associate it back with your door object later on, okay? And after we've done that, we're actually now going to create that global variable that I was talking about earlier. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to this area of the menu on the, so we're up to creating a key. We're adding a script to our key object at the moment. That's where we're up to. Is everyone up to that section with me now? That's okay. So once you've added in, so what you need to do is you need to go to that key object that you added in, and then you just need to right click on that and add a script. So you're going to, first of all, you're going to add in this when created block followed by a tag name, so that you've got a, so that the key object is going to be called something. So like I said, I've called mine key. So you can add that in so that you know that the object is a key. So once you've added in that section, we're going to then add in a global variable. So on that menu on the left, you'll see underneath the variables menu, there's a section called global and local. If you click on that, you'll see that you're given two options. You can either create a global variable or create a local variable. And it actually gives you a little bit of a description as to what each one is just above it. So you can see that it says global variables hold values that can be read anywhere in the entire game. So this means that we can use this variable that we're about to create in any script throughout the whole game. So I'm going to click create global variable, and the global variable that I'm going to create, I'm just going to call mine keys, okay? And the type is going to be true / false, okay? So it's going to be a true and false variable, which I'm going to call keys. And I'm going to click on OK. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to actually drag that set global true false keys block into my when created block, and I'm going to use the operator that says true, but what I want to be setting it to is false. So we're going to have, these are the only blocks of code that we need in the whole script for the key object. We need a tag name that says that the key has that the key object has the tag name of key, and we're going to create a global variable, a global true-false variable called keys that's going to be set to false. And you'll see why in a second why we're setting that to false. So I'll just let everybody catch up with that, and then we'll move on in just a second. So we're going to move on to adding code to the door in just a second. That's fine. So, like I said, the idea of having this global variable is that you're able to access it at any point throughout the whole game, and we use these global variables quite often in programming because they can be useful when you've got a program that uses maybe lots of different functions, which is something else we're going to be looking at in a second. We're going to be looking at using functions. it's really, really useful to have a variable that you can access at any point throughout your whole program, because sometimes it can be a little bit difficult if you've just got it confined to one section of the program, and if you need that value throughout the whole program, having a global variable will let you do that. So now that we've got our key object script set up, I'm going to close that script and I'm going to save it, and I'm just going to call mine keys, or key, whichever works for you. So I'm going to call mine keys, and I'm going to hit save. And once that's saved, I'm then going to head over to my door object, and I'm going to add a script to my door object, and then we're going to get, once again, we're going to get a blank script screen that we're going to use to add a script to that. So first thing that we're going to do is, we're like with the key object, we're going to go to events and we're going to say when created, so that as soon as the object loads, we'll go with when created. And like with the key object, we're going to add a tag so that we know, so that we can use that, so that we can associate our door object with other parts of with other objects in the game. So I'm going to call mine door. Okay. Like I said, it's up to you what you call it, just as long as you remember what it is. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to physics, the physics menu, and I'm going to set a block which is right down the bottom called set immovable true. And the reason that I'm using that block is because if we don't put it there, what's going to happen is, as soon as our playable character touches it, the door's just going to glide away. And we don't want that door to just be gliding away, because it wouldn't make a very good door if you could just push it over. So what we've done is, so far, we've added a tag name to the door so that we can associate it with other parts of the game. And we've also added this new block, which is just going to stop us from being able to move the door just by touching it, because we only want to be able to open the door once we've got the key. So I'll just let everybody do that section, and then we'll move on to the next bit. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to add in some code now, a few blocks now, which is going to have our door object. It's going to allow our door object to react to when our playable character has the key. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the physics menu. And in that physics menu, we're going to see a block called when I am touched, get toucher. And that block we've used quite often as a means of allowing different objects to react to being hit or grabbed by something like the playable character. So within this block, we're actually going to add another if statement. So you can see that I'm using if statements very, very often as we're building our scripts through the game. And the same concept is applied in programming. If statements are used all the time as a means of checking whether or not conditions are true as we're working through our program. And you can see that I've used lots and lots of them as we've been going along. So the first block I'm going to add to this if statements condition is a block from the operators section, which you should see right at the top under the Boolean area, called true and false. Now, true and false, you can see that the keyword and here in the middle can be changed to an or. And one thing that you can do in programming is you can actually check certain conditions, like multiple conditions at the same time. Now we're going to be sticking with using and, but in programming you can actually use and or the or condition. So what that means is that you can check whether or not both conditions are true. So if we wanted some code to run and we're using this and keyword, What that means is that we would need both conditions to be true in order for the code to run. Whereas if we were using the OR keyword, it would mean that we'd only be checking whether or not one condition was true in order to run the code that's part of the if statement. So we're going to be sticking with and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking whether or not the object that's touching the door is the playable character, and we're also going to be checking whether or not the playable character has the key object, because if they don't have the key object, or if they're not the playable character, then we don't want that door to be able to open. Okay, so both of our conditions need to be true. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to that sensing block, and if you scroll down to the tagging section again, you should see a block called myself has tag name. Now, one thing that's important, and we're going to put that in the first condition of our if statement. Now, one thing that's important to remember here is that this myself block doesn't mean the playable character. The myself block actually means the object that this script is associated with. Okay, so in this case, that myself block is referring to the actual door. So we don't want it to be associated with myself. We want to be checking whether or not what's touching the door has the tag name of player. So you'll remember earlier that we set our playable character up to have the tag name player, or whatever you called it. So what we want to do is we want to say whether or not instance toucher, so whether or not what's touching the door, has the tag name of player, then we would like the door to open. Now, the other condition that we need to check is whether or not we have our, whether or not our playable character has the key object, okay, whether or not they've picked up a key to open the door. Now, you might remember that we created, obviously, this global variable earlier, this true-false global variable, and we set its value to false. So in a moment, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going to our playable character script, and we're going to be editing it so that when they grab the key, it gets set to true, which means that they have the key, which means that they can open the door. But what we need to do on our door script to begin with is tell the door that it can only open if that global variable is set to true. So I'm going to use an operator to do that, and I'm going to use the first Boolean operator that you see in the list of operators, which is the one with the equal sign. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking whether or not our keys variable is equal to true. Now, you may find in the global local variables list that you don't quite see the key object. And unfortunately, this is a small, it might be that you can see it, but if you can't, this is a small issue with GameFruit, but there is a way that we can fix it. So what you need to do in order to fix that is you need to close down your door script object, your door object script, save it. So I'm going to just call mine doors, okay, and then I'm going to hit save. If you head back on over to your key object and edit its script, if you remove the global variable for keys, throw it in the bin, and then bring it back again and set it to false. Once we head back over to that door script in a second, you should see that it has popped back up. I know it's a bit of a strange situation. Unfortunately, I have tried to think of ways to fix it, but I think it is a bug with GameFruit. It might be that you're already seeing it in the list. If you are, then that's great. But if you're not seeing it yet in the list, then just head back over to your key object, remove the global variable, and re-add it so that way, and set it to false. And now, if we save that script and head back to our door script, we should see in our global variables list that the keys variable now appears. So I know it's a little bit inconvenient, but can everybody now see that keys variable in their global and local variables list? If they can't, let me know, and I'll cover how to fix it again. Okay. Are we all good? Super. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to check whether or not our keys global variable is set to true, which will mean that our playable character has actually picked it up. So I'm going to take that global variable and I'm going to say, you can see it is, that's wonderful. Okay, good. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if instance toucher has tag name, has tag player, and our global variable keys is equal to, and if we go to the operators menu, you should see the true block. Then that means that we're now checking whether or not our global variable is set to true. And we'll set that up in just a second so that we're able to determine in the character script when they've picked up that key. But what we want to do is we want to tell our door object what to do when they pick up the when our playable character interacts with it. So if you go to the animations menu, you should see that play animation block that I was talking about earlier. If you drag that in there, most of the door objects in the game have got a script, have got some set animations associated with them. And there is one that's available for opening the door. So if you add in the play animation block opened and set the animation from idle to opened, now when you interact with that door object, the door should open once you've picked up the key. And in order to allow for the character to pass through the door, we want to use a block from physics, which can be found a little bit down the bottom under collisions, called set all side collisions to true. And what we want to do is we want to set those collisions to false. So that on my screen now is the completed script for the door object, okay? So I'll just do a quick run through of that now. So when our object is created, we're going to add the, so i.e. when the level loads, it's going to be given a tag, which in my case is called door, and we're going to make the object immovable so that it can't actually move. We've also set up our if statement within our when I am touched get toucher block to check whether or not our playable character has got whether or not, sorry, the item that's touching the door is the playable character, and whether or not they have the key using that global true-false variable. And if both of those conditions are true, then we're going to open the door, and then we're going to, and then our playable character is going to be able to walk through it. Okay, so that is pretty much all we need to do for that script. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a little while, just so that we're able to, just so that everyone can catch up. And if you've got any questions, just let me know. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on, I think, now just to add that little bit of script to our character script, just so that we can ensure that when our playable character picks up the key object, that we can unlock the door. So I'm going to close my script on the door and save it, and then I'm going to go back over to my playable character and edit the script on there. And once that loads, I'm going to go right the way down to the when I am touched get toucher section of the playable character script. And we're going to add in a new if statement, okay? Now, it is absolutely fine to just duplicate one of the ones that's there previously. So if you look at the top one, if you right-click on that and duplicate it, and drag it to the end of the block. So don't make sure that it's not part of any other if statement and that it's its own standalone thing. We're going to just edit this if statement down the bottom here now so that it reacts to us picking up that key object. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that go to current level because we don't want it to do that. And I'm going to change the if instance toucher has tag key, or in my case I believe it was key, but remember to make sure that it's definitely what you set it to. Once you've done that, we're then going to have our global variable, which we created earlier for keys, set to true. So I'm going to go to set global variable keys, and then I'm just going to say true. And from the control flow menu, I want to use this destroy myself block. And obviously I don't want the playable character to be destroyed, so I'm going to remove myself, and I'm just going to use the instance toucher variable. So that way that once we pick up the key, what will happen is as soon as we picked up that key, it will destroy itself so that it doesn't just stay fixed in the same place. So what we're going to be doing, if I just run through it again, is we've added in an if statement that's saying that if what we're grabbing has got the tag name of key, then we want our true-false keys variable to being set to true, and we want to destroy it so that we can no longer see it. Okay, so I'll just keep that popped up on there for now, and then we'll carry on in a second. Okay, so if you hit play, what you should see now, once it loads in, is once you run over to that key object, you should be able to pick it up, it'll disappear, and when you run to the door opens and you can run through it, okay? And if I restart the game, and if I walk past the key, hopefully I can jump over it, you'll see now that once I get to the door, I can't open it, but if I go back to collect the key, the door opens, okay? So that is how we set up our key object in the game, okay? So that's how we get doors to work. So using that global variable means that in any part of the game, we are able to now access that keys variable because it's a global variable, okay? So they're really, really useful in a lot of aspects of programming if you want to get if you want to use a variable in several sort of different parts of the game, of your program, sorry, okay? The next thing I'm just going to quickly show you, it's sort of optional whether or not you include it or not, but I'll just run through it quickly with you, just in case you fancied adding it into your code. So I'm going to close my character script. I'm just going to go over to one of these collectible objects, and you can see here that I've just got these coin objects. I'm going to just edit the script on them, and I'm just going to add in a new block from physics, which is that set immovable true block. The only reason I'm adding that in is I found that on occasion, as I've been playing the game, if a moving object runs into one of those collectibles, it will start pushing it along the floor, and really I'd like it to be fixed in the same place. So by setting that immovable true block, it will just prevent you from having to worry about any moving objects pushing things out of the way or off the map or sort of out of view. So if you just add that in, that one block of code, it should help you just to stop you from suddenly losing items that might get pushed away from off of view if it gets hit by a moving object. If you close that and just hit save, all of your collectible items will now have that script associated with them and that updated script, so that should be fine. It was just something in case you fancied adding it in, just in case you were having any problems. So, like I said at the start, what we're actually going to be covering now is adding in enemy AI to the game, which is something that is quite important in most computer games, because as you all know, there's always some sort of opponent that you need to defeat. There's always something that needs to be defeated. So we're going to actually add in our own enemy AI. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that there's an area on my level that's wide enough to actually cover the space that the AI needs to run, because sometimes I've found that if it's in too sort of a confined space, it doesn't like to work in the right way. So I've gone down to this section of my map, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to build up a little bit more floor space down here, so that when my enemy AI is built, now it's going to run around in this section down here. Okay, so if you've got a section of your map that you'd like to build up, just to have a little bit more floor space, then that would be good. So if you just do that quickly now, and then we'll carry on in a second. Okay, so there isn't always an enemy that you need to defeat in a video game, but there often is something that you need to try and defeat in a lot of video games. Okay. Is everyone happy to carry on? Have they built up enough space for the enemy AI to run around in, or would you like a bit more time? Okay, super. Okay, we'll carry on, and then if at the end of the stream that you'd like to add a little bit more space to your level, then that's absolutely fine. We should hopefully have a little bit of time at the end where you're able to add in some new things. So what I'm going to do to begin with is I'm going to go over to my character layer, and I'm going to just go down to that section which I made earlier, which is going to hold my enemy AI. Now, if you have a look under in that media menu on the left in the character section, there's quite a few people who you can have as characters. I would advise to choose one of two options. So there's this person and there's this person, and really it's a bit hard to choose sort of which one to pick. I would recommend this character just because a lot of the other ones are quite big and they can take up a lot of space. Like this one is gigantic, and I don't think you really want to be putting that into the game. So I'd kind of recommend this guy as one to kind of choose because it's quite small and it's also got an animation tied to it as well, so that you can have it run around and it doesn't just sort of glide around the map. So I would choose, like I said, one of those two, but preferably this character because it has got animations tied to it. So once you've picked your character, we're going to right click and we're going to add a new script so that we can program it to run around our map to make sure that it chases us as we play the game. So there's quite a lot of code associated with this script. So if I am going a bit too fast, or if there's something that you'd like me to explain again, just let me know so that I can so that we can cover it, because there is quite a lot to cover in this sort of particular section. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to go to events and we're going to say when the level starts. So as soon as our level starts, we're going to have our playable character, our NPC, load up. And the first thing we want to do is we want to give it some velocity so that it's actually able to move. So we're going to go to physics and we're going to go to motion and we're going to say set velocity x 0. Now I'm going to set the velocity of mine to 200, but it is entirely up to you how quickly or slowly you would like your playable character to move through the game. Okay, and then we also, like with our playable character, would like it to react to gravity. So to do that, we're also going to go back to physics and we're going to find a block which is buried in this menu somewhere called set reacts to gravity true. Should find that in here somewhere. Just in down the bottom there's set reacts to gravity true. Okay. So the other thing that we'd like it to do is we would like our NPC to actually play its running animation, which is why I suggested that you use one of the objects that has got animations tied to it, because without the animation tied to it, it's not actually going to be able to look like it's running. So we're going to go to animation and use that play animation block that we used earlier, and we're just going to use the the run animation, so that way it looks like our playable character is actually running through the level. And you might remember last week we covered an area which discussed how when we were playing as our playable character, if we were to change the direction that it was facing, it would flip backwards and forwards and kind of clip through walls. We want to prevent it from doing that. So we're going to go to the transform block and we're going to use a block called center anchor point of myself. And that is the same block that we used last week in our playable character script to make sure that when we do change direction, it doesn't clip through the walls and fall off of the map. So in order to get our playable character, our enemy AI to actually be associated with our playable character so that it reacts appropriately to our playable character, we're going to need to actually make two variables. So the first variable that we're going to make, and we're not going to be making a global variable here, we're just going to be creating a normal variable which can be read anywhere in this particular script, okay? And the first variable that we're going to create, I'm going to call mine player, because this is the one that's going to be associated with my playable character. And I am going to call it, I am going to make it an instance variable, okay? And you'll see why in a second. So we're going to make that variable. And the other variable that we're going to create is a number variable, which is going to represent the health that our enemy AI has, because we want to be able to battle it out at the end of the when we reach it, and so we need to have some health associated with our enemy AI. So I'm going to make a new variable called health. So in order to get our AI to react to our playable character, what we're going to do is we're going to use this setInstancePlayer2 block to react to our playable character. So to do that, we're going to go to Sensing, and you'll see a block in there called, under tagging, first instance by tag name. And of course, the tag name is going to be whatever you called your playable character. So in this case, it's going to be the player, okay? And what we also need to do is we need to set our AI to have some health when the level starts. Now, I'm going to set my AI to have a starting health point of 100, okay? So it's kind of like 100%. And it's, so that way, there's like a nice sort of round number that will be associated with it when the level starts, okay? So I'll just leave that on the screen for a second, and then we'll carry on. So I'll just run through it all again. So we're going to give our character movement using that setVelocityX200 block. We're also going to set reacts to gravity true, so that we're able to say that our AI doesn't just float off into space. We're going to make sure that the running animation is always playing, so that when the AI is running through the game, it's playing its running animation. We've set the anchor point, or we've centered the anchor point of the AI so that it doesn't flip and clip through walls when it changes direction. And then we've used our two new variables. So the first one is going to mean that our NPC is associated with our playable character, and the second one is there so that we've got some health tied to the playable character. Okay. Okay. So while everyone's just catching up with that, I'm just going to add in two new blocks, just so that we're able to have our enemy AI have a tag name. Now, what we want to do is we want our enemy AI to have a tag name which ensures that when the playable character reacts to it, it reacts in the same way to what it would if it was a normal obstacle. So to do that, we're going to use another one of our event blocks, which is the when created block. And we're going to add a tag, like we've been doing before. So add tag name on myself. And like with the other obstacles in the game, I'm going to call mine obstacle. Okay. Now, like I said, just make sure that you're calling the tag, that you're setting the tag name of the enemy AI to being the same thing as what other obstacles in your game have. So just make sure that there's consistency between all of them throughout the game. Okay, because otherwise it's not going to, the playable character won't react in the same way when it encounters the NPC. Okay. So, the next thing that we're going to move on to is we're actually going to start building in some functions. Now, functions are really, really important parts of programming. Okay, so I've just had someone say that the audio is gone. Can everybody still hear me all right in the stream? Okay. Okay, that's fine. So, like I was saying, we're going to be making some functions, and we use functions quite often in programming as a means of, let's say for an example you've got some code that you need to repeat in several parts of your program. Well, the last thing that you want to do is have to write that code out several times, time and time and time again, because it can be quite monotonous. So what we're going to do instead of that is we're going to create what's known as a function. And these functions will mean that you only have to write out the code once. And once you've written out that code, all you need to do then is call the function in different parts of your program. Okay? So go to the functions menu on the left, and we're going to add in this function, we're going to add in this block, which is the top block, which is to do something, okay? And we're going to put that into our script. And we're going to be making two functions today. So if you duplicate that, you should see now that you've got to do something and to do something too. Now, these two functions that we're creating are going to be how our playable character reacts to how our NPC reacts when the playable character comes into close contact, okay? So, to begin with, the first function is going to be called, I'm going to call mine walking left and right, okay? And the second function I'm going to call chasing. So what's going to happen now is the first function that we create in a second is just going to be set, when it's called, it's going to mean that the NPC is just walking left and right. And the second function that we're creating is going to be that when the playable character gets closer to the NPC, it starts chasing them and it moves slightly faster. Okay? So, with the walking left and right, we're going to add in an if statement. So go to control flow and add in an if statement. And we're going to make that if statement an else if. So if you click on the little star symbol and drag in that else if block, you'll see now that we've got if something, do this, else if something, do this. So what we're doing here is, like if you remember from last week, we're checking to see if one condition is true, then we'll execute some code. Else, if another condition is true, we'll execute a different bit of code. Okay. So what we need to be doing is checking to see what direction is the AI being approached from. Okay, whether or not they're being approached from the left or whether or not they're being approached from the right. Okay, and we also need to say whether or not it's touching a particular side. So if it touches the right side of the screen, what happens? And if it touches the left side of the screen, what happens? So let's say it runs into an obstacle or it runs into a wall. We don't want it to keep running at that wall or at that obstacle. We'd like it to flip and run in the opposite direction. So that's what we're going to be doing here. So if you go to the physics block, you should see in that menu a section called under collisions touching on any side. If you drag that and put it one into the if and one into the else if, okay, one's going to be touching on right side and one's going to be touching on left side. So it's going to be checking whether or not both sides, so it's going to be constantly monitoring both sides, okay, whether or not the NPC is hitting the left side of the screen or the right side of the screen, okay? And what we want to do is tell it what's going to happen if it does hit one of those sides. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to physics and we're going to give it some velocity. So we're going to set that velocity x to something. And we're going to do that in both sections. So you can duplicate that block and you can pop it in both sections. Now, since in this case the character is only going to be walking, I don't want them moving too quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my x velocity if it touches the right side to move in the left direction. So that's going to mean setting it to minus or negative 75. Okay, but it's up to you what speed you set it. I'm just going to set mine to 75. And if it's touching the left side, I'd like it to move in the right direction. So I'm going to set it to positive 75. Okay. And of course, what we also need to do is have our sprite facing in the correct direction so it doesn't look like they're walking backwards if they have to change direction. So that's going to be done using a block which we've used before, which is that set x scale of myself to 1 block. Okay, so we're going to be using that in both sections. So you can duplicate it. And remember, if they're going to the left, it means they're going to be needing to face in the opposite direction. So we're going to set that to -1 or -1. Okay, and that is all that we need to do for that function. Okay, so in order to make sure that our character is walking left and right, we're going to say if they're touching the right side of the screen, or touching a wall on their right side, then we want them to walk in the left direction, and we want their sprite to be facing in that direction. And if they hit something on the left, then they need to face the right direction, to the right, and they need to walk in the right direction. Okay, so that is how we would set up our walking function. And the fact that we've put that in a function now means that we don't ever need to write that bit of code out ever again, because you will see in the functions menu that those two functions we've just created have now been made into their own little blocks. So all of that code that we've put into that block there now is now part of these tiny little blocks here. Okay, and that's known as a function. Okay, so we've got loads and loads of code packed into one small thing. Okay, packed into one tiny block. So that's how functions work. And what we'll do in a second, once we've built up our chasing function, is we're going to actually call that function, okay, which we'll do in just a second. Okay. So what we'll do is, once everyone's happy, we'll move on to looking at that chasing function. We'll also be adding in a few more bits, and then I'll do a quick demo to show you, and you can test it, of course, yourselves in the game. And I'll show you what happens if we end up changing some values around, and how you can sort of modify your NPC to do different things. Okay. So, like I said, what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to that chasing function. Okay. So go down to that chasing function, and this one's going to be a little bit bigger than the walking left and right one. Okay, so we're going to actually be using two different if statements. So if you go to control flow and add in a new if statement, okay, and duplicate it so that you've got two of them. And I'd like you to make the first one, like with the walking left and right function, an else if. Okay, so that we've got one else if statement, and we've got one just ordinary if statement down the bottom. Okay, so the purpose of this section is we're going to be saying what happens when our playable character comes into closer contact with our enemy AI, okay, or with our NPC, because we don't want them to be just walking when they get close to it, because we want to make it a little bit more of a challenge to try and defeat them. So we want them to walk a little bit faster. So what we're going to do to begin with is we're going to set up a few blocks which are going to which is going to allow the enemy AI to identify from what side the playable character is approaching. Okay, so to do that, we're going to use some operators, and the one that we're going to choose is this equals operator, which is at the top of the screen here. Okay, and we're going to want one of those in the if, and we're going to want one of those in the else if. And what I'd like you to do is change the unit that we're going to be checking. Okay, so instead of it being equals to, the first one's going to be less than, and the second one is going to be greater than. So the idea here, and I'll zoom in a little bit just because I know that it's quite small. So the idea here is that what we're going to be checking is whether or not the position of the enemy AI to the player is on the left or on the right, and that's going to be done using these less than and greater than symbols. Okay, and this is again another concept that we use quite often in programming, is less than or greater than. It can be used in things like loops as a means of being able to check whether or not a certain variable's value is greater than or less than a certain amount. We use these sorts of things all the time. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to check whether or not the position of the enemy AI is to the playable character is coming on the left or on the right. So if we go to that transform menu, okay, you will see a block called X position of myself, and if you pop that into the second section, okay, so we're going to leave those first two areas blank to begin with, and we're just going to be checking whether or not the position of the enemy AI, how close that is in relation to our playable character. Okay, so to get it to check how close it is to the playable character, we're going to use these X position of blocks again. So we're going to duplicate those and we're going to put them into the first section. But instead of checking how close they are to myself, what we want to do is remove those blocks, and we want to be checking whether or not they're close to the playable character. Now you'll remember at the start of the script, we set our player variable to being first instance by tag player. So what that means is that that variable is now tied and linked to our playable character. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to say that the X position of instance player, okay, it might be a bit fiddly to try and get it in. There we go. So we want to be seeing whether or not the X position of instance player is less than the position of myself, else checking if it's greater than the position of myself. Okay? And so we're going to be just essentially checking from what side is our playable character approaching, so that way our enemy AI can react appropriately to chase our playable character. Okay? So what we want to do is essentially tell it what it's going to do if the playable character does come into close contact with the enemy AI. Okay, so we're going to set some velocity, and again from the physics menu, and what we'd like to of course do this time is make it slightly faster than what it was before. So again, I'm going to duplicate it so that I've got two versions, And instead of it being 75, this time I'm going to double it so that it's going to be negative 150 and positive 150. But again, it is up to you what speed you set it. 150 is quite fast for Game Fruit, so if you are going over 150, you might find that they end up being a little bit too quick and you can't actually escape from them. So sort of bear that in mind as you're choosing what speed to set your playable character as your NPC to. Okay, and like with before, we're going to use that set X scale of myself blocks to make sure that our enemy AI is facing the correct direction when they're approached by the playable character. So we're going to use that set X scale of myself to 1 block. And again, we're going to have one set to 1, and we're going to have the other set to -1, so that they're always facing in the correct direction. Okay? So we also need to tell our enemy AI what to do if it does come into contact with a wall.
Okay.
So let's just say they are chasing. Let's just say they're chasing one of the playable characters, and they come into contact with a wall. What we want them to do is to be able to jump over that wall so that they can still chase the playable character. So in that second if statement, we're going to be using another one of those operators. And this time, we're going to be using that true and false one again, but we're going to be changing the and to being an or, so that it's checking whether or not one of the conditions is true in order to execute a certain bit of code. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to say, if they're touching on the left side or the right side, then they need to jump. So we're going to go if touching on any side, and we're going to duplicate that so that we've got 2, and we're going to say if touching on left side or touching on right side, then we'd like them to jump. And if you remember from the playable character script, to do that, we just set our y velocity to being -500, or however high you'd like them to jump. So now, if we do a quick run through of this function again, our playable character is going to be, if it gets into close contact with our NPC, it's going to increase the speed of our NPC, and it's also going to face in the correct direction. And if our playable character ends up, whilst chasing if our NPC, whilst chasing our playable character comes into contact with a wall, it's going to jump so that it can still continue to chase the playable character. Okay? So I'll just leave that there a second before we carry on. Okay. So what we need to be able to do now is actually call our functions, okay? So like I said earlier, we have these functions created, which is good, but having the functions just placed in the script like this isn't actually going to do anything, because all we've said is that this block of code here, this function, is going to do this. but we need to actually tell the game when it needs to run or cut up those functions, which is known as calling the function. So what we'll do is we're going to set up a constantly loop so that it's constantly monitoring events in the game to see when it needs to actually call those functions. So we're going to use a constantly loop, and within that constantly loop we're going to set up an if-else statement, which you can again find in control flow. Okay, so if, do, else. Now what we need it to do is check whether or not the distance that the playable character is from the NPC is close enough to a point where it's going to either run the chasing script, or the chasing function, or the walking left and right function. Okay, and so the idea is that it's going to be constantly checking how close our playable character is to our NPC to decide which one of those functions it needs to run. So we're going to use another one of those operators, which was the equals operator again. And once again, we're going to change that to being a less than symbol. Okay? And what we need to set is how close does our playable character need to get to the NPC in order to make sure that it's not so either to make sure whether or not it's chasing or walking. So what we'll do is, if you go to the sensing menu and scroll down quite a ways through, you should eventually find a block which is angle from myself to instance other. Okay, if you drag that in and slot it into the first block, you can actually change that angle keyword to distance and instance other to being instance player, so that we're constantly checking the proximity of the playable character to the enemy AI. Now, you can use an operator to set how many units of distance you would like to put between you and the enemy AI before it starts chasing or carries on walking. Now, I'm going to say 200 units, okay? So that way, when it gets 200 units of distance in proximity to the enemy AI, it's going to start chasing, else it will just perform walking left and right actions. Okay, so what we need to do is call in our two functions that we've just created. So we're going to go to that functions menu, and I'm going to say if the distance from myself to the player is less than 200 units, then I would like it to chase the player, else I would like it to just walk left and right. Okay, so we're checking here now how close we are to the playable character. Okay, and if in this case it's less than 200 units, then we would like our NPC to chase our playable character, else we would like them just to walk back and forth. Okay, so that's what that small if statement is doing there. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a second, and then we'll carry on. Okay, so you might remember when we created our NPC that we actually set a variable up to hold the health of the playable of our NPC. Okay, now what we need to be able to do is tell our NPC what happens when its health reaches 0. Okay, because what we don't want to happen is, for no matter how many times we attack the NPC, it just remains alive. We want to find a way to be able to destroy it, so that way we can get past that section of the level. So within this constantly loop, we're going to be adding in another if statement. And this is just going to be a normal if statement. We don't need to add anything to it. Make sure that it's placed underneath the pre-existing if statement. And what we want to do is check whether or not our health variable is now set at 0 or not. Okay? And if it is, then we need it to play the dying animation. So if we go to the operators and use another one of those Boolean equals to blocks, we can change that equal sign to what you'll see is a less than symbol with a little line underneath it. Okay? And if you see that, and I'll zoom in so that you can see that on my screen, that little line underneath means less than or equal to. Okay, similarly, you can see that there's one for greater than as well. So if I were to just put less than, it would mean that I'd be checking whether or not something is less than a certain value. If I put it as less than or equal to, it's going to mean that we're now checking whether or not our value is less than or less than or equal to the value that we're putting in this block here. Okay? So what I'm going to be checking is whether or not my health variable has a value of 0 or not. So I'm going to go to my variables menu and I'm going to set my number health variable. And we're going to be checking whether or not it's less than or equal to 0. So we can just grab that straight from the operators menu. Okay, we're going to put that in there. So we're now going to be checking whether or not our health variable is set to a value of 0. Now you'll remember at the start of the level we set it to 100. So when our game is being played, this constantly loop is going to be constantly checking whether or not our health variable has reached 0 or not. And the script that's associated with this if statement will not run until our health variable reaches a value of 0. So what we'd like to do is play the dying animation when the health variable is at 0. So we can do that by simply going to the animation menu and we're just going to be playing the dying animation. And you should, if you've chosen an NPC that has, or one of those characters that has got an animation tied to it, you should be able to, you should have the dying animation already tied to it. If you haven't chosen one of the other ones, it doesn't matter. You can just pop that script in there anyway. It'll just mean that when you're playing the game, if the health of the NPC does reach 0, it's not going to play any form of animation. Okay. Now, as it currently stands, if we were to play our game as this was now, the animation for the NPC dying or being destroyed wouldn't actually stop playing. Okay, it would just continue playing on repeat. So we need to set up some script which is going to stop it from playing once it's looped through the animation once. So under that animations block, you'll see a very big block at the top, which is when the animation idle has completed. We want to use this block, and instead of idle, we want to be saying that it's the dying animation, and instead of completed, we want to say looped. Okay, so once that animation for looped has completed, once that animation for the NPC dying has looped or fully completed, then we want it to disappear from our screen so that it no longer can impact our health. Okay, so to do that, we're going to set its velocity to 0 so it doesn't keep chasing us even whilst the animation is playing. So we can set the x and y velocity to 0, so you can duplicate that block so that you've got an x and a y velocity. Okay. And we also want to use an event block, which is, a control flow block, which is destroy myself. So that way, as soon as that animation has stopped playing, as soon as the animation is playing and it's then completed, the NPC is going to remain still and then it's just going to disappear from the screen. okay? So that it's no longer going to be something that can attack us in the game, okay? So if you hit the play button now, and then save your script as something like maybe enemy, okay? And then you hit the save button. You should find now that when you approach your your NPC, it starts running slightly faster when you get near it. And also, if you do hit it, it will set you back to the start of the level again. Okay, so you can see here now that my NPC, it's running, and then as soon as it gets near me, it starts chasing me, and it sets me back to the start of the level when I hit it. Okay. So I'll just show you that again. So it's running, and as soon as it gets near me, it realizes that it's near me, and then it starts chasing, and then it will send me back to the start of the level again. Okay. So I'll just leave some of that code up on the screen for a little while. I'll just go back down to there. Now, what we do need to do is have a system in place for us to be able to attack that enemy AI so that it can't keep chasing us. Now, that is something, because we are running quite near to the 6 o'clock, and there is quite a lot of code, that is something that we can do next week, okay? So I will cover the code for it next week. However, if you wanted to, you are more than welcome to try and find out how to do it yourself. In the meantime, you can sort of set it as like a little challenge for yourself to try and figure out how that would work. What we'll do in the meantime is we'll set up our enemy AI to be able to react to being hit by a projectile, okay? And then what we'll do next week is we'll cover programming that actual projectile so that it can actually cause damage to the enemy AI, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a new block of code again, and it's going to be that block of code that I think we're all quite familiar with using now from physics, which is the when I am touched, get toucher block, okay? And within that, we're going to need to set up a regular if statement so that we have something to check the condition of. And what we need to be doing is we need to check whether or not the item that is hitting us has a tag name, okay, of bullet. So what we're going to be doing next week when we produce our projectile object, we're going to be giving that object a tag name, which will then mean that if our enemy AI gets hit by that object in some way, that it reduces its health. But what we'll do is we'll set up our enemy AI now to being able to react to that object, and then we'll set that object up next week, okay? So if you go to the sensing block, you can use that myself has tag name block, and of course instead of myself you can replace that with the instance toucher variable, and then the tag name will be whatever you decide to call your projectile object. So I'm going to call mine bullet, but it is entirely up to you what you call it. Like I said, next week we'll be setting up that object so that it has got its own tag name. But what we'll do for this week is we'll just set up our enemy AI to be able to react to that object, and then next week we'll actually implement that object ourselves, okay? So what we want to do is we want to say, if the thing that is touching the enemy AI has the tag name of bullet, then we want to be able to reduce the health of the enemy AI, okay? So what we can do is we can actually reduce the value of our enemy AI's health. And we can do that by using that set number health to block from the variables menu. And what we would like to do is be able to set its health to being whatever its current health value is, minus 25. Okay, now I'm setting mine to being minus 25 because that way it would take 4 hits in order to destroy the enemy. Okay, but it's entirely up to you what you set the health reduction to. Okay, so you can do that by going to operators and using that 1+1 block, which is down here. If you change the plus symbol to a negative symbol, and instead of that first number 1, setting that to being the number health block, you can then choose by how much you would like the health of your enemy AI to go down when it is hit by a bullet. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to set mine to being minus 25 because that block will mean now that it will take up to 4 hits to destroy the enemy AI because its initial health is set to 100. Okay, now like I said, it doesn't matter what you call the object that's going to be acting as a bullet, just as long as you've got as long as you remember what it is, so that next week when we're programming the enemy AI's bullet, the playable character's projectile object, we'll know that it can associate itself with that enemy AI. I have just noticed that, Oliver, you have lost your work. I know it's a bit of a nuisance. I know it's a big nuisance when something like that happens. So, like with last week, what I'll do is I'll post a copy of my script into Discord, so that way you'll all have something to be able to work on next week, and I'll post that at the end of the stream, so that way you're able to catch up as you're playing through the game throughout the week, if you wanted to amend it to being slightly different. Okay, I'm really sorry that has happened. I know it's a big sort of inconvenience when it does happen, but I will post a version of my game in the Discord so that you're able to edit it. And it's going to cover everything that we've covered today. So you've done all the hard work, which is the main thing. So I will post a copy of this into Discord for next week. Okay. Okay. So if you close that script and save it, what that's going to mean now is that our enemy AI has now got a script associated with it to react to our playable character and to also react to our playable character's projectiles. So next week we will cover how to program those projectiles, okay? And we'll also be covering a few other concepts as well, which include things like adding in a main menu screen, adding in an end of game screen, adding in some game over screens. And what we'll do is, if you wanted to, you can also then add several levels to your game, okay, so that you're not just having one level. You can actually add as many levels as you like to the game. But that's what we're going to be covering in next week's session. So we're going to be covering adding in a projectile, and different menus, as well as a whole bunch of other miscellaneous things to kind of finish off the game's design. And then the following week, after that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be actually having a session where we're just going to tidy up on a few things. We're just going to be kind of playing on each other's games and things like that. It's going to be a bit more of a less theory and more sort of playing about on other people's games kind of session. So that will be in 2 weeks' time, and that will then be the last session that we do on Game Fruit. So we've got 2 more sessions on Game Fruit to go. So like I said, I will post a version of this specific game in Discord so that you're able to catch up and edit it as you please throughout the week. But we have actually thought of a few optional challenges that we'd like you to try and do. So there are 2 altogether, and then we'll probably set another one next week. So it's up to you whether or not you do these. You don't have to do them if you don't want to. It's just something that we thought you might like to try out. So the first thing that we'd like you to try is, you might notice that when you're playing the game, we programmed, I think it was last week, we programmed the HUD so that when we collect objects in the game, our score HUD in the top left-hand corner of the screen increases every time we collect an object. What we'd like you to be able to do is program your game so that way you've got the word score placed in front of that. So if I remember correctly, I think I might have it on the version of GameFruit that I've got over here. If I just load that up for you to see. So you'll see that in the top left-hand corner of my screen, I currently have the word score. So that's one thing that we'd like you to try and complete. And then the other challenge that we've got for you is, can you figure out a way to have the playable character also have the that dying animation played if they come into contact with an obstacle? Okay, so you might remember that down here with our NPC, we programmed that NPC so that when a playable character, next week when we program the projectile, when its health hits 0, it plays the dying animation. We'd like you to try and work out whether or not you're able to do that with the playable character. So I'll show you an example of that now. So now, on my other version of the game, if I was to run into an obstacle or run into my NPC, for an example, okay, you can see that the playable character has the dying animation played, and then they get sent back to the start of the game again. Okay, we'd like you to try and figure out a way that you can do that for your playable character. Okay, so that's 2 challenges. Okay, see if you can add the word score to the HUD so that you've got something displayed so that you know what that number is in the top left corner of the screen. It doesn't have to be the word score, it can be whatever you like it to be, but just so that you know that that is a collectible, that's there as a means of showing how many collectibles you've collected as you move through the game. And then, can you figure out a way to play the dying animation on your playable character so that when they come into contact with an object, can they then can the dying animation play with them as well? Okay. So, like I said, I'm really, really sorry to the ones that have lost their work in because of GameFruit deciding to crash. I know it's really, really frustrating when that sort of thing happens, but I will post a version of my game in the Discord, which will cover everything that we've covered today. So that way you can edit it and amend it as you please throughout the week. In addition, if you do have any questions about anything on GameFruit, or if you manage to come up with a solution to those challenges, please let us know in the Discord chat throughout the week. I'm really eager to see what you come up with. And if you want us to sort of have a play around in your games and stuff like that, then please post copies of them in Discord, okay? Because it would be really good to see the sort of work that you're doing. I know that for some of you it might be a case of having to amend my version of the game if you've lost yours, but that's okay too. I'm happy to see anything that you work on. I think it's really, you're all doing really, really well. We've covered a lot of really kind of in-depth like programming concepts today, so it's really good to see. It's really good to see the progress that you're all making with it. It's really, really good, and you're all doing really, really well. So before we finish up today, does anyone have any questions or anything else that they would like us to cover next week? If there is anything that you would like us to kind of cover next week, we can try and look into it for you. Okay, climbing the ladder. I can have a look at. Okay, climbing a ladder or rope. I can try and have a look at that. See if there's anything we can do with that. If there's anything, I'll have a look to see if there's something we can do with that. Like I said, if anyone has any ideas of things that they would like us to have a look at, please let us know so that we're able to add those in, because it would be really we're open to suggestions of things that we can do, and we'd like you to kind of give feedback to us on the types of things you'd like to cover so that we can incorporate those into the sessions as well. So like I said, next week is going to be another session on Game Through, adding in a few more things. And then I think that should be everything for today. So like I said, Alex, next week, Game Over screen, we'll be adding that in next week, absolutely. So that'll be there next week. Climbing a ladder or rope, I will look into this. That's absolutely something that we can have a look at to see if we can do. If anybody else thinks of anything throughout the week, just pop it in Discord and we can try and find some ways of figuring it out. But other than that...
Maybe a way you could do the climbing ladder is when they touch the ladder obstacle, you change the animation to climbing and have Y move on a plus minus dependent whether you went up or down using the images. Something you could try as well, but we'll look into it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely one way that you could do it, and as Andrew said, we'll definitely spend some time taking a look into it to see what we can do. But like I said, that'll be us. I think that'll be everything for today. So like I said, thank you all for joining in again and things like that. It's really great to see you all taking part in this with us. But for now, thank you everyone. Have a good week. And I'll see you all next week in the next live stream. Andrew, I'm going to stop the stream now, okay?